she's so fine. Hell of a ride, blows my mind. Hell of a ride, lights my day.
What's good, guys? Earlier, I posted a video regarding an Oklahoma sports broadcaster who, referencing the Norman, Oklahoma girls basketball team taking a knee during the national anthem, had a hot mic and called them the N-word. So everyone listening to that live broadcast of the girls' state basketball tournament heard this. There was some discussion in the comments about the topic of taking a knee. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to educate those that were uneducated on the matter. I'm going to use this article from the BBC because I think it explains it best. Black Lives Matter. Where does taking a knee come from? You can see several taking a knee there. American football quarterback Colin Kaepernick sat on the bench during the U.S. national anthem to protest against police brutality and racism in a preseason game on August the 26th of 2016. Kaepernick said at the time, quote, "I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color," end quote. He discussed his motivations with Nate Boyer, a military veteran and former NFL player, who advised him to kneel because he thought it was more, quote, respectful, end quote. Kaepernick switched from sitting to kneeling on one knee on September the 1st, 2016, generating national media attention. What was the reaction at the time? Some fans were not happy with Kaepernick's actions, calling them unpatriotic and accusing him of disrespecting the flag. U.S. President Barack Obama defended the player's constitutional right to make a statement and pointed to the long history of sports figures protesting. There you see in the image Kaepernick and two teammates kneeling during the national anthem. But the following year, recently inaugurated President Donald Trump said that Kaepernick and any other players who joined him should be fired by their teams. His comments divided opinion and led to scores of athletes, managers, and coaches across several sports performing some kind of protest or gesture of solidarity in September of 2017. In 2018, the NFL introduced a rule requiring players to stand during the anthem, but this has since been repealed. Kaepernick himself stopped playing for the 49ers in 2017 and has not had a contract since. I think they need to update that, though. What's happened at Black Lives Matter protests? Taking a knee has become a common sight at demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. Starting at the end of May in Minnesota, protesters took the knee and called on the police to join them. You can see them in that image there. Kaepernick offered support to the protesters and offered to help those arrested with legal fees. What about previous uses of this gesture? An image of Martin Luther King going down on one knee while in prayer at a civil rights march in 1965 has been widely used in recent years. As well as prayer, in some U.S. sports, participants take a knee when a player is injured. What other protests have sports stars made? At the Mexico Olympics in 1968, Tommy Smith and John Carlos gave the Black Power salute on the medal rostrum. Basketball star Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf refused to stand for the U.S. national anthem in 1996 and described the U.S. flag as a symbol of oppression. In 2014, in the NFL, 5 St. Louis Rams players did a, quote, hands up, don't shoot, end quote, pose after Michael Brown was killed by a police officer in Missouri. LeBron James and other basketball players wore t-shirts with the words, quote, I can't breathe, end quote, written on them in 2014, echoing the last words of Eric Garner, who died after being restrained by police officers in New York. Now, when I say educate, I'm really going to educate because I'm taking this from a remote learning website for students. Understanding hashtag take a knee in athlete activism. Policing and the legacy of racial injustice. A series of teaching ideas designed to help students think critically about the long and troubling history between law enforcement and black Americans, while not stereotyping or criminalizing all police officers. In August of 2020, players in the NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball, and Major League Soccer decided to go on strike, walking off courts and playing fields in protest of systemic racism and police brutality. These strikes, which unfolded in the wake of protests after the deaths of unarmed black people at the hands of law enforcement, build on a long tradition of black athletes using their platform to protest racial injustice in the United States. Colin Kaepernick's goal was to protest police brutality, racial injustice, and systemic inequality. In his own words, "We protest because we love ourselves and we love our people." It was James Baldwin who said, "To be black in America and to be relatively conscious is to be in rage almost all the time." My question is, why aren't all people? How can you stand for the national anthem of a nation that preaches and propagates freedom and justice for all, that is so unjust to so many of the people living there? How can you not be in a rage when you know that you are always at risk of death in the streets or enslavement in the prison system? How can you willingly be blind to the truth of systemic radicalized injustice? Kaepernick's gesture of taking a knee was adopted by a number of other NFL players, including Eric Reid, Jeremy Lane, and Brandon Marshall, among others. Initially, NFL leadership objected to the protest, but after the death of George Floyd, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell endorsed the protests, and they have gained popular support. Over the summer of 2020, taking a knee became a common gesture of protest during Black Lives Matter protests. How can athletes influence us? Many people, adults and youth alike, look up to athletes, giving them the power to influence public opinion. Think of a time when an athlete spoke out about a social cause. What was the cause? Did it change how you thought about the cause? Did it change how you thought about the athlete? What is the symbolism of taking a knee? It says to show their students the three images of Colin Kaepernick, protesters in New York, and Martin Luther King Jr. in the New York Times article, kneeling, fiercely debated in the NFL, resonates in protests. It asks the students to reflect on the following questions. Why do you think the people in each image are kneeling? What is one word that you associate with the phrase take a knee? Share the captions of the images from the New York Times article with your students. Then share the following quote from Chad Williams, the chair of the Department of African and Afro-American Studies at Brandeis University. Kneeling is both an act of defiance and resistance, but also of reverence and mourning, of honoring lives lost. According to this quote, what is the symbolism of kneeling? Why might people choose to kneel as a form of protest? Can you think of other types of symbolic actions that people use in protest? What has changed since the Take a Knee protest began? Since Colin Kaepernick started the Take a Knee protest in the NFL, public opinion and the official rhetoric of NFL leadership have shifted dramatically. It asks the teacher to share the following sources with your students to explore what has changed and what hasn't since the Take a Knee protest began. In 2016, after Colin Kaepernick began the Take a Knee protest, only 28% of survey respondents said that they considered his protest, quote, appropriate. In 2017, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell wrote the following in a letter. We live in a country that can feel very divided. Sports, and especially the NFL, brings people together and lets them set aside those divisions at least for a few hours. The current dispute over the national anthem is threatening to erode the unifying power of our game and is now dividing us and our players from many fans across the country. In 2020, 52% of survey respondents agree that it is, quote, okay for NFL players to kneel during the national anthem to protest police killings of African Americans, end quote. In 2020, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell issued the following statement. We, the NFL, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the NFL, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the NFL, believe Black Lives Matter. It asked the teacher to tell the students that Roger Goodell released his statement after the murder of George Floyd and after pressure from NFL players. On behalf of the National Football League, this is what we, the players, would like to hear you state. We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the National Football League, admit wrong in silencing our players from peacefully protesting. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. The NFL players asked the leadership to, quote, admit wrong in silencing our players from peacefully protesting, end quote. In Roger Goodell's statement, he states, quote, we, the NFL, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier, end quote. How did Goodell's alteration to the statement change its meaning? What do you think the difference is between, quote, silencing, end quote, and, quote, not listening, end quote? I thought this was a really good article. It goes on to ask, how else have athletes advocated for social change? In August of 2020, after Jacob Blake was shot by police in Wisconsin, players in the NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball, and Major League Soccer decided to go on strike during a number of games to protest racial injustice and police violence. Their actions built on the legacy of Colin Kaepernick and other athletes who have participated in the Take a Knee protest. It shares a section from a New York Times article. It goes into the history of them protesting. It even speaks about Cassius Marcellus Clay, better known as Muhammad Ali, protesting the Vietnam War, refusing the draft, and he was stripped of his heavyweight boxing title. So I just thought this was a good opportunity to educate some of my subscribers that may have gotten a little confused somewhere along the way. And my grandfather was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant in World War II, 1st Marine Division, straight out of Parris Island. Hoorah! And he fought in World War II for people to have that right, to be able to protest. So, I mean, you know, you can spin it however you want. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to educate. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Have a great night.